In the last decade, many people have chosen to change their diet to a vegetarian or vegan diet. The most prominent reason to omit meat from their diet is reduced mass meat production. Reduced meat production in turn has a better impact on the environment and animal welfare. For others, avoiding meat has to do with their religion, health, and/or they do not simply like the taste of meat. Although the latter group exists, the majority of the vegetarians actually do like the taste of meat. Interestingly, a lot of meat eaters agree with the just mentioned reasons to leave out meat from their diet. However, they still eat meat simply because they like it so much. One solution to this problem might be cultured meat. Cultured meat is also known as slaughter-free meat, cell-based meat, clean meat, and in vitro meat, among others. In short, cultured meat is a form of cellular agriculture in which animal cells are grown outside its host to produce meat without the need of slaughtering animals. Although the concept of growing meat outside an animal was already created in the 1900s, the first beef patty was realized in 2013 by Maastricht University here in the Netherlands. Since then, many companies were created with the aim to find an efficient and sustainable method to produce cultured meat for human consumption. The need for cultured meat arose when problems associated with the current meat industry were getting more and more evident. The main problem that corresponds to this course would be the animal suffering related to the growth and slaughtering of livestock. Also, the meat industry contributes 18% of greenhouse gas and 37% of methane gas emission worldwide, and will increase even more if we continue like this. Of course, this has a direct impact on global warming. Furthermore, meat products require a lot more land to produce than plant-based food based on the same amount of food energy. The cattle sector, for example, is the main reason for deforestation in the Amazon region. Another problem is that the nutrient conversion is inefficient. For example, 1 kilogram of beef requires 7 kilograms of grain. The energetic value of the grain that is fed to the animal is partially lost within the metabolism of the animal itself. Finally, there are safety and health concerns associated with the meat production systems. A researcher states everyone, even non-meat eaters, at an international scale is put at risk by the pathogens released from stressed, immunocompromised, and contaminant-filled livestock. Antibiotics have a direct adverse effect causing disease, as small amounts of antibiotics can be found in food, and antibiotic use might harm humans indirectly via antibiotic resistance. So how does cultured meat actually work? As this field of research is relatively competitive, precise protocols have not been published yet. Nevertheless, the principle remains the same. Fundamentally, you would need a tissue donor, a bioreactor to proliferate and differentiate the cells, and after that, you would need to harvest and process the cells to the final meat product. The first step is to choose a suitable tissue donor. The major component of meat is muscle tissue. However, already differentiated and mature myotubes which form the muscle fibers do not have the ability to proliferate themselves. Hence, stem cells are the cells of choice as they do have the ability to proliferate and differentiate into desired cells needed for the tissue. Muscle stem cells are multipotent stem cells that can differentiate into these myotubes and is present in skeletal muscle tissue. There are two main parameters that must be taken into account while obtaining donor tissue. One, the yield of the stem cells per gram of tissue, and two, the longevity of those stem cells. The age of the animal and the area of the extraction of the biopsy affect those two parameters. Once the donor cells are obtained, the cells are cultured to increase the total mass. On a large scale, this is done in bioreactors, which provide a controlled environment for cells by maintaining the temperature, pH, and oxygen level. Besides the right conditions, nutrients for the cells are needed. There are different recipes of culture media. Besides the basic nutrients such as amino acids and vitamins, culture media might contain growth factors. Often these growth factors are derived from animal sources, which needs to be considered if the final product is aimed to reduce the animal use. Growth factor 3 medium might delay culture development, therefore synthetic growth factors are considered in the process. However, this might be more expensive. Once you harvest your cells at this stage, you will probably obtain a product that lacks the shape and texture of animal meat. To improve the quality of the meat, different articles propose techniques that enhances the structure on a cellular level. Of course, meat is not just made of muscle tissue. On average, 12.5% of hamburgers consist of fat tissue. Including adipose tissue enhances the overall texture and flavor of the product. Also, in complex tissues, different cell types interact with each other. In vitro monocultures, cells lack these interactions and usually result in growth in a two-dimensional form. Co-cultures with different cell types might mimic an in vivo physiological environment that influences cellular growth. Other methods to enhance the 3D structures of the tissue include the use of edible scaffolds and the use of electrical and mechanical stimulation to improve the development of mature muscle fibers. Although huge progress has been made in the last decades, to create meat that is indistinguishable from conventional meat remains a challenge. Meats such as steaks are complex on a cellular level. Technologies such as nanotechnology or tissue printing, in which cells are arranged on a cellular level, can increase the quality by using so-called marbling techniques or by the help of inclusion of a vascular system. But beside the technical challenges, there's still lack of data on how sustainable and realistic culture meat production really is.
So besides the large variety of technical challenges, there's also a large variety of other challenges, such as socio-political challenges, which the most important one might perhaps be whether it is ethical. Everyone can agree probably that the cultured meat takes away the violations of animal welfare to a very significant degree, but also the environmental strain is released significantly using cultured meat rather than livestock. So the question is not really whether it is ethical on its own, but whether it is the desired solution. And by that I mean whether it is desired to keep consuming meat rather than turn to vegetarianism or even veganism, as people might argue that that is the superior moral response, which is of course extremely subjective. As I said, they all agree on that the animal dignity is not violated, but some people still do, which I will come back to later. Additionally, research groups state that biotechnology to solve ethical crises is a slippery slope because, again, you don't really solve the problem, you just come up with a substitute that is, for instance, not the desired one, but as more of a makeshift solution. Because in the case of cultured meat, we do keep consuming meat, and thus it is still the norm. It is not like demonized or anything, which is again a subjective matter. But would it be, for instance, a better solution to fully step away from meat consumption? Additionally, it is not entirely sure whether it will fully replace farm animals, because, for instance, when the stock on cultured meat runs out and it is still the norm to consume meat, will people then just turn to farm animals again? Will it run side by side, as in 50% is cultured meat, 50% is farm animal meat, and there's no real solution in that sense. So it's just, again, as I said, a makeshift solution and a replacement, or rather an addition. Finally, the animals used during the research are sometimes harmed, as in they are slaughtered for their fetal stem cells, or the stock you keep for the donors you keep for the cells also live in bad conditions, for instance, which is an very good take, of course, but many people disagree that this is a significant violation of the animal welfare. Well, the violation on itself is of course significant, but it's not a big part of the research. And finally, quite a far-fetched uh, take perhaps, but one group mentioned that the cultured meat might cause for a shift in power because of the economical aspect, because the expense of cultured meat will be quite high in the beginning, of course, and they fear for a shift of power towards an elite that does not consume meat, but then lives guilt-free of the meat consumers and just earns money and money and money. But that's how capitalism works, I guess. So that's also pretty subjective to everyone, of course. The second social political challenge is, of course, consumer acceptance. Will consumers buy it or not? And definitely in the case of cultured meat, it's not such a simple question anymore of will the consumers buy it or not, because also political views, uncertainties regarding the product, is it safe or not, for instance, what impact it has on society, and of course, what impact it has on you as a person, are all quite, well, extremely relevant to the question. It's not a question of do you like it or not. And many studies have been performed to assess this public opinion, and they all found that the results are extremely uh, different from each other. You go from very positive to very negative, and let's say 80% in between is mostly uncertainty of people who do not want to pick a side or are not informed enough to pick a side. And because of this, people have said that the opinion on cultured meat, because it is such a new technology, and because there is so much uncertainty regarding cultured meat, the people's opinion is heavily affected by social media posts or regular news posts, and this can be swayed quite easily. But it is also a thing to look at the future rather than now, because in the future the context surrounding cultured meat might change a lot, in the sense that it is becoming a much more needed thing because of global warming, etc., or because there have been other cultured products such as milk or cheese, whatever, and which is somewhat easier to make than than meat. And if that is a success, then people are bound to be in favor of public meat as well, they state. So, as I said, they do think it is important to currently poll people's opinions, but it is much more important to keep thinking about the future and how it may affect them over or in 5 or 10 years. So now then, of course, rather than the socio-political challenges, there is a immense variety of regulatory challenges, because it is, of course, such a very innovative field of research. And there are multiple things to look at. And the first thing to look at is the product itself. How will it be, or what will it be labeled as, and how will it be uh, taken up into the existing regulations regarding foods? The first thing to think about is whether cultured meat will or is considered as equivalent to livestock meat. Then you look at whether it's originating from an animal product or not, and how, of course, this will affect regulation. Um, because if it is equivalent to livestock, there's different regulation sets for it than if it is not considered as equivalent to livestock, but then it requires new regulations. Another thing is genetic modifications. There are articles that include genetic modification in their process for cultured meat. And if this is the case, and the majority of the people working in the field shift to genetic modification, then it also requires completely new regulatory bodies, because in the 2015 novel food regulations, specifically in Europe, then genetically modified foods are omitted from that, and thus they won't be allowed under those rules. So there's an entirely new rule set needed. And also, as I said, if it is originating from animals, then you also need livestock, animal welfare, and slaughter regulations to keep, for instance, a donor herd and to obtain the stem cells from the donor herd. Those regulations exist, but it's more of a question, are they required for regulating cultured meat or not? Secondly, is the safety of the product. So how will it be regulated that it is safe, that it is of sufficient quality, etc. Then again, we go back to whether it is labeled as animal origin, because if that is the case, then you require adequate regulation surrounding the pathogen identification and use of antibiotics in animals for the stem cell donors. Furthermore, then the quality of cellular functions is required, but that's always needed because, of course, the cells itself they grow, and you need to assess the quality and safety of those processes in order to get to the quality and safe final product. So there's regulation needed for that as well. And then again, the genetic modification is a question. If this will be the main way of producing cultured meat, is it safe to consume? Because it is stated that genetically modified foods are somewhat comparable to cancer tissue as they proliferate and divide quite rapidly and non-inhibited. And that raises the question whether it is safe to consume a cancer tissue-like produced cultured meat. And that, of course, then requires also a lot of time and money investment into regulating this. Thirdly, as I said in the beginning, cultured meat will probably relieve a significant part of the strain on the environment in comparison to livestock, but there's not really that much certainty regarding this topic as of now because there's no large scale production of cultured meat. And if there would be, then in a sense that it would fully replace livestock, then nobody knows the scale at which that happens and how much that will weigh on the environment. Think of waste process. Where does the waste go? Where does the energy to provide the bioreactors come from? That's all a thing to concern about, and also again needs widely regulation. And then finally, there are some small concerns that, such as food fraud. It's not really a small thing, but it is a quite interesting thing because cultured meat might be sold as livestock if it does not fully replace the livestock meat, or vice versa, where livestock is sold as cultured meat. And those are both problems, of course, because they require different regulations and there's different safety and quality rules for them. Another quite far-fetched concern is, of course, whether it will stay with animal cells. There is some concern regarding the use of human cell lines and would then, of course, identify as cannibalism, etc., etc. And that's a very big issue if it happens, but it's not really much of a concern as of now. But it is an ethical topic that has to be discussed and possibly regulated. So, in conclusion, the current meat industry puts too much strain on the environment and other related issues, such as health, of course, and hence it is in need of a change. Cultured meat, as of now, seems to be a good replacement on paper, at least, because of course there's too much uncertainty whether it will work in the real world, so to speak. But if it would work, then it is definitely a great replacement. But then it will still be in need of a lot of refinement because the techniques used to make culture meat are somewhat primitive, not on its own, but compared to what real meat is. Think of taste and of fat and whatever. But it also needs refinement in the sense that it has to be sustainable and that it has actually be able to reduce the environmental strain. So there's think of the waste again and of the energy needed to run these facilities with the huge bioreactor. So all in all, it is a good replacement, a promising replacement, but due to the uncertainty surrounding the entire topic, it needs a lot of refinement in order to be able to reduce the meat consumption and the environmental strain. And that's just not certain at this point, but let's hope for it and see what the future brings us.